All right, we all good to go? Mr. Tao, we can't hear you yet. Can you hear us? We're going to go live into the webinar, and hopefully you can jump in, Mr. Tao. I know we've been trying to contact you, but hopefully you can join us. But we'll jump into the broadcast and get underway, and hopefully you can hear us at some stage. Okay, everyone's coming in. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you may be tuning in from around the world. We'll just give a couple of minutes for people to come in. Love you as you come in. If you wouldn't mind, just in the chat, just drop in maybe your name and where you're calling from. I see Adam O'Connor coming in there from Ireland, Andy McLaughlin all the way down in Australia, Dave Budge there from Western Australia, Dermot Brereton from Ireland, Dermot Brennan, sorry. Mike Isa in Chicago, hello. Lisa from Sydney. James Robinson from London, hello James. There's a whole bunch of people. Kate Amara there. Simon Mueller from Riyadh, hi Simon. Ricky Naylor from Melbourne. Getting some... we had over 150 people registered for this. I see we're already up to 60. Sam Middlehurst in from KL, hi. Jan from Amsterdam, hi again Jan. Folks, while we're bringing everyone in, I'm just going to start, as I typically do, with a poll just to get a sense of who's on the call. So I've just launched that poll. If you wouldn't mind just giving us a sense, just filling in that. Rachel from France, hello there Rachel. Sivaporn Pia, I don't know you Siva, but I'm guessing with a name like that. And Nichapa is smiling, you must be coming in from Thailand, welcome. Rachel Baton, cloudy Biarritz, I guess tough surfing in the cloudy weather, but thanks for joining us Rachel. Kevin Pereira from Mumbai, Dave from Ottawa, lots of early risers. Edilberto Gonzalez from Monterrey in Mexico, fantastic. Manfred from Pretoria. Wonderful. Okay, well, whilst that poll's going, let's get underway. Thank you so much for joining us for this panel in our weekly Mass Participation World webinar series. Today's topic, global collaboration to speed up the safe return of mass participation sports events. And it's wonderful to have such a broad panel from all over the world and different time zones. So when I set the timing, we initially didn't have Kirsten on the call, so Kirsten's awake at 4 a.m. in the morning. So a big welcome to you first, Kirsten. Kirsten Fleming, Executive Director of Run Calgary and a member of the Endurance Sports Alliance Canada. Thank you, Kirsten, for joining us so early in the morning.
Thanks. I can't imagine a more worthy topic getting up so early for. So thank you for having me.
Wonderful. And you were saying you're not going to be getting up to do any runs anytime soon early. So this is worthwhile. So thank you so much for that. Kyle McLaughlin, CEO of Tough Mudder and part of the Endurance Sports Coalition in New York. If I'm correct, Kyle, you're joining us from New York.
Yes. Good morning, Chris.
Wonderful. Also an early start for you, 6 a.m. Thank you so much. Chris Heverin at the other end of the day, joining us from Melbourne, Australia. He's the MD of Spartan, Australia and New Zealand. He's also the chairman of AMSI, the Australian Mass Participation Sports Event Alliance. Thanks, Chris, for joining us.
Pleasure, Chris. Great to be here with everybody.
And welcome. Thank you. Mr. Tao Shaoming, CEO of Yingtao International Sports Event Management in Beijing, Director of Chinese Athletes Overseas Training Department, part of the Chinese Athletics Federation. Ni hao, Mr. Tao. I'm still not sure if we can hear you. Can you hear us now, Mr. Tao? Hopefully we're going to be able to fix that audio. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Tao. Joining us from London, Paul Foster, Chief Executive of Great Run Company and part of a loose group of companies that's not formally announced as an alliance but have been working with governments and different agencies in the UK. Welcome, Paul.
Thanks, Chris. How you doing?
And finally, Sawadee Krap, Nichapa Yoswee, Senior Vice President, Business, Thailand Convention and Exhibition Bureau, TCEB, joining us from Bangkok.
Sawadee ka. Good evening to everyone, and thank you, Chris, for having me.
Thank you so much, Nichapa. For those of you that don't know me, Chris Robb. I'm the founder and CEO of Mass Participation World. Delighted to have so many people joining us. And as expected, we are bulk of the people from the mass participation sports industry, but we have some people from government, not-for-profit, and music and festivals and so on. So I'll just share that poll before we move on to a couple of other things. Just a very quick piece of housekeeping. If you wouldn't mind, if your guests that are calling in as opposed to the panelists, please stay mute so we don't get any feedback. There are opportunities, please, and we would welcome questions in both the Q&A and the chat boxes. I have those open all the way through, and I'll be trying to feed those questions in as they come through. And then just a couple of other quick initiatives. Some of you join every Monday. We have a Strength in Numbers call, which is 4:30 p.m. Singapore time, where I just host a Zoom chat room where people can come in with all their different perspectives. We've been doing that now since almost the onset of COVID. I've also been running and have one of our esteemed guests on the aid station, Kirsten, who we interviewed the other day. I've been running and super excited. Tomorrow is our 50th edition, so 15 to 20 minute interviews with people from all over the world. Tomorrow we have Robbie McEwen, 3 times Tour de France green jersey winner, organizes his own Grand Fondo in Australia. You can pick those up through various mechanisms. Connect with me on LinkedIn. They're hosted on the Mass Participation World YouTube channel. And these masterclasses, webinars happen every Thursday, roughly in this time zone, depending on our panel. Next week, we go to the 3rd edition of the new Operations Normal, which is Mike Nishi and Hugh Singh from Australia. Hugh is the medical director of the Singapore Marathon, Mike Nishi from Chicago Marathon, and we talk about operational developments in terms of what the new operational norm is going to be. And the week after that, a very exciting one on sponsorship, the new normal, what will sponsorship look like? Delighted to have Giles Morgan, the former global head of sponsorship for HSBC, Michelle Taylor, the global head of sports sponsorship for Tata Consulting Services, and James Robinson, who's on this call, chief commercial officer from Limelight in London. And all the way through, if I can help you in any way, questions relating to anything, please feel free to email me directly, chris@chrisrobasia, or connect with me on LinkedIn or Facebook. The idea is really to just try and help as many people as possible as we go through these times. I'm just going to pop another quick poll in before we finally get underway here, and that's just to get a sense of the service segment that people are in. Over the next, we've allocated an hour, and we may go a little bit over with questions. It's a big panel tonight, 6 people obviously, but we thought it would be great to try and get as much perspective as possible and take as many questions as possible. So if necessary, we might go for an extra 10 or 15 minutes. We're going to go through probably 7 key areas if we can. We're going to get each of the panelists to do a quick introduction, 3-4 minutes on their organization, what they've been doing. We're going to talk about funding in terms of how people have been funding these programs and initiatives. We're going to talk about lobbyists because some people are working with lobbyists and it might be useful. One of the objectives of today is to share as much as possible so we can get a sense across the world of what's happening in different geographies. But I know that there's still many countries where there aren't alliances, there isn't collaboration, and many of these alliances are new. And the one hope is that these become lasting organizations that continue to support our industries going forward. And for you, those of you that on the call might want to start those in your own countries, hopefully that's going to give you some tips if you might want to lobby us. We're going to talk about research. We're going to talk about government engagement beyond lobbying. We're going to talk a little bit about COVID safe plans, and we're not going to drill down into a massive amount of detail, but just some big ticket items in terms of what's being focused on. And then all important, the communication of what might be happening. So I'd like to start, if I may, by throwing to you, Kyle, because the US Alliance was the first cab off the rank, so to speak. The Endurance Sports Alliance. And I'd love you just to share with us, please, a bit of the background, how that came to being, what your kind of remit is, and some of the things you've achieved to date.
Sure.
Thanks, Kyle.
So, in the first days after COVID, the quarantine hit in the States, which was that kind of weekend of Friday, March 12th, going into the following Monday, we started to see rolling waves of cancellations. The New York City Half Marathon was that weekend, and rolled through to a lot of the March and April events started to disappear off the calendar almost overnight. And myself, Joe DeSena from Spartan, Andrew Messick from Ironman, and a handful of the leaders from different kind of industry associations running USA Triathlon, which is the national governing body for triathlon here, had a number of kind of informal and impromptu phone calls over that weekend saying, what are we going to do here? And what does the future look like for us? Knowing that at that time, the US government, Congress hadn't taken any steps towards financial relief for businesses. We knew and could foresee the future that if this continued for even a short period of time, it was going to cause some substantial and widespread effects to our industry. So over the course of the next week and a half, we put together a kind of executive committee consisting of the Spartan Tough Mudder Group, Ironman, and then our partners at Running USA Triathlon, and USA Cycling, and aligned around principles, and that being that if mass participation in endurance sports were going to survive, we were going to need some long-term support from the government to be able to do so. I think, as most of us have seen, revenues disappeared quite dramatically almost overnight. The impact of cancellations and refunds and sunk costs put most of our cash flow and our businesses into a pretty challenging position. And the legal liability, regulatory environment, what does return to sport look like? How do we get out, particularly in the states where you've got a state by state and oftentimes a locality by locality view on what is allowed and what's not allowed? How are we able to safely return to operating events amidst an environment where public health officials are saying one thing and politicians are saying something completely different? So we launched, several of the bigger players in the group determined that they were going to fund the organization, hired lobbyists, and we opened it up to the entire broader endurance sports industry in the States. And this is truly the first time, I've worked in endurance sports in the US for 15 years, but the first time that I've seen people come out of their own sector to work together kind of across industry. For a long time in the US, the running people have stuck together, the triathlon groups have stuck together, the cycling groups have stuck together, obstacle course racing has been its own kind of island unto itself over here. And this is truly the first time that big players and small players and the supporting industries, registration companies, coaches, medal and t-shirt manufacturers came together to say, this is impacting all of us and we're better off speaking with one consistent voice. So from that, we've been active both publicly, with over 850 members now across the country in all 50 states and Puerto Rico, and organizations from single, sole proprietor coaches all the way up to the Ironmans, Spartans, New York Roadrunners, size organizations in the States. We've been doing everything from conducting advocacy calls with elected officials. We were on with Senator Schumer's office as recently as last night, discussing what the next round of stimulus legislation is going to look like, making sure that elected officials understand the unique nature of our business. A lot of the stimulus legislation that's come out, at least in the US, has been geared towards stabilizing things in the front end and focusing on businesses that everybody can wrap their head around. People see restaurants struggling, and a restaurant, while certainly hit hard in this pandemic, needs about 7 days to be able to ramp back up and get reopened again. They've got to buy some food and rehire some people and clean their building and open the doors. We need months, right? We need 6 to 12 months to be able to create an event, to put it on for sale, to secure permits, to ensure that we can sell enough registrations to make that event sustainable. So for us, it's not about throwing our doors open again and seeing cash start to come in. There's a long road to recovery for this industry, and helping to make sure that the policymakers in the states understand that as they're crafting legislation to make sure that we can protect the 500,000 jobs that the endurance industry supports in the US is going to be critical going forward.
Some great insights, thanks, and great traction in terms of 850 members. Thanks for that, Kyle. I might go to a kind of a different perspective and throw to you, please, Nichapa, in Thailand, because an interesting perspective, which I only became aware of when we had a chat this morning, is that the collaboration of a fairly small alliance at the moment was fundamentally initiated by TCEB, saying it's really important for this industry to have a peak body and to collaborate. And I'd love you just to give us some insights, please, of how that's happened in Thailand and some of the things you've achieved already in terms of, and you shared this morning that it's almost close to back to business in Thailand as well, 24 days with no new cases. So at the kind of opposite end of the spectrum to many.
Right. Thank you. I think, first of all, I'd like to introduce a little bit because TCEB is run under different platform with most of the CVBs worldwide. We, of course, are the government agency and we report directly to the Prime Minister office. And that gives us quite a good edge in terms of getting the message across directly to the top guy. Of course, we look after the MICE and mass participation events. The way that we work is that we work very closely with and always on a friendly note with the MICE Association, for example, Meetings and Incentive Association, Exhibition Association, Event Management Association, and also mass participation organizers. They don't have the association by themselves at this moment, but I believe that they are now forming their own association, which is good because it can be a good creative resources. They can also represent the country in terms of being the bidding agents and also can be a good lobbyist together with TCEB going out there or going towards the government agency. The way that we work is that we always formed a task force whenever we have any significant policy to craft, any matters to tackle, especially COVID case. The latest initiative that we have, TCEB has with these relevant MICE association and also mass participation groups was that we came together and we collectively create or formulate what we call hygiene discipline as a new normal SOP, standard of operations, standard operation procedures for all related parties in terms of all service providers throughout the value chain up until the new practice for participants. TCEB then used this guideline, the hygiene discipline guideline, as measured, and we presented to the Ministry of Public Health and also presented it to the cabinet to show them not only the importance of MICE and mass participation towards the increasing of economic and social impact of the country, but also to give them an assurance that we can run a safe event. And right now, the cabinet has approved the reopening of MICE and mass participation activities, of course, with certain strict compliance to measures like physical distancing, the opening hours, such and such. But again, right now, it is good to know that all MICE events and also mass participation activities is can run, yeah. However, with certain restrictions, I believe it is really depends on how the organizer can formulate their plan around the rules and regulations, which I believe that they can do so, because right now there are so many events in Thailand that had turned partially to virtual. Some of them had turned to fully virtual. But again, we have series of sport events lining up towards the end of this year. And we are now working together with the organizer on how to apply the new normal SOP into the creation of those events.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. And we'll come back a little bit later and just in that section trying to get a sense of what those new normals might be broadly. I'd love to hear some more about that, and I'm sure the audience will. Chris, why don't we jump down to Melbourne and hear your, AMC was formed about 5 weeks ago, if I'm correct, and has got amazing traction and a slightly broader remit, I think, but love to get the insights from you, please.
Sure, Chris. Well, it was 7 weeks ago that we first got underway, and that was on the back of an introduction from Spartan out of Boston, and then actually Kyle and myself jumping on a call and having a chat about what was happening in the US. And as a result, then reached out to a number of industry colleagues, people across Ironman and some of the major fun runs and other events. But we there was about 8 of us in the first week got together, and what we felt is that we needed to have firstly a very broad remit. So we invited quite a number of people into the executive from the start, so that we've actually got a really broad representation on our group, not just event operators, So we thought that was really important. That so we've got insurance, we've got registration platform, we've got workforce, we've got a former Nathan Rees is a former Premier of New South Wales, one of the states here. We've got government representatives, we've got local government, and as well, obviously, I said the registration platforms, but also the some media. And so we felt we needed to have a broad remit so that we were having full representation of the industry. We also then identified a roadmap about what we wanted to achieve. And firstly, obviously government is the first one that we need to engage with and to get really heavily involved. But we felt that we needed to get a roadmap from government here in terms of what we can do, what we can't do. We're fortunate that the numbers in Australia and also in our business, we work in New Zealand. New Zealand's obviously a great success story. They've reopened for business as usual in New Zealand. They had rugby matches on the weekend, last weekend, with a capacity of 40,000 people and no social distancing. And so quite a great story in New Zealand. In Australia, the numbers are very, very low now, and we are starting to move our way out. But we're also got a number of borders shut. So the roadmap is really important in terms of what we need to do to be able to get back, get our events back. As Kyle said, we were the first out. Mass gathering events were shut down. It was the Australian Grand Prix was the catalyst. Formula One Grand Prix, it shut down. Everybody else got shut down on the same day. And we're really the last ones to come back. So the first part of our task was to establish a roadmap. The second part was to actually get a process where we can go to government, and that process involved firstly attracting members, and we're sort of pushing over 300 to 400 members now, and that's growing rapidly. I think we've had another 50 or 60 this week that have come on board on the back of a bit of a webinar we did with Chris last week to the Australian market, and that's growing rapidly. And we also felt that it was really important to have data. We felt we needed to know what was happening in the industry. And so a group of our team, of our executive, got together, formed a team. Some resources were provided by Ironman and a couple of the other companies. And what we were able to do is do a detailed research study out into our marketplace to find out what the real impact was. And so we've got really firm figures in terms of we know what's happening. So within Australia, there's 3.4 million people do a mass participation event every year. Since COVID, there's 8,500 events have been cancelled or postponed. That impact on is 11,000 jobs have gone idle. $70 million of donation to charity to 2,500 charities has stopped, it's ceased. And the impact on the community is on the Australian community with the ceasing of our events at the moment is 1.1 billion. And so they're fairly compelling figures when you look at us as an industry segment. And that's really, without the crossover into other things like live events and so forth, where this is really just the mass participation events. So it's a big number. So what we've then done is we've gone and reached out to our members and built this database up and this group of members up. And then what we've moved into is approaching government and approaching media. And so we're in the middle of a concerted campaign to government around Australia, both federal government and state government, and where we've reached out to all of the key ministers around the country. And we've also had quite a bit of media traction starting to build with a number of stories and using a number of athletes as well. The other part of AMPSI that Chris referred to at the start is that from day one, we felt that it was really important that this was a long-term play. Whilst the immediate strategy is obviously to get back to business, it's to get stimulus funding from our government, which is really important. And many of our operators, our registration platform providers who are part of the group are telling us that we're around 40 to 50% of operators are not going to come back after COVID. So that's half of our industry or half of the operators are decimated without government support. So we're really pushing that government support firstly, but then what we have in place is plans to create a peak body to be able to represent the industry on a broader basis, to be able to look at aggregation and integration. Again, I'll refer to what Kyle said earlier, but we talk about the silos, that everybody, individual event operators have been working in silos, different groups have been working in silos. We've said, let's try and break those down. It's going to take some time to do that, but everybody's working together, and with broad representation, our goal is in the future to be able to get through COVID and then be a really meaningful force in terms of what we can do from the industry across a whole range of facets where we can work together. We can look at buying groups, we can look at insurance, we can look at marketing. There's a whole range of things that we've got on the table that make sure we haven't got there yet. We're not there, but we've certainly got those in the plans in the future.
Thanks for that, Chris. Comprehensive, and the different approach, and I guess it's going to be different for each country in terms of what they're achieving, but obviously quite a broad one down there in Australia. Why don't we head over to Paul now in London, and yours is I guess a little bit different, that it's not so structured. A couple of the bigger players come together more informally at this stage, but a number of the big players and a slightly different strategy.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing here is we, late last year, a number of us in the event space in the UK started talking about collaborating on sustainability. So, we've a different topic, but we all face very common challenges which aren't necessarily competitive advantages for each other. So we formed a group, and we actually met in the last week of January with operators from every major event, a running event in the UK. So London Marathon, ourselves, A Great Run, Human Race, Limelight, Threshold, other representatives of big single events like Brighton, Bath, and sat down and set up a framework to start tackling sustainability issues. And that was a productive meeting. A couple of weeks later, we all got slammed with COVID and the beginnings of the lockdown. So we actually had this group, we had a Teams, Microsoft Teams group all set up and everything. So it naturally progressed from there. But the first thing we tackled after lockdown was a big charity project. In the UK, we are serious fundraisers for our domestic charities. We do over 235 million pounds worth of charity fundraising in the UK alone, from running events alone. And so we came together around the weekend of what would have been the London Marathon in April, and collaborated on a huge charity fundraising project, which was a national campaign around that weekend. So that brought the collaboration together quite quickly. We know each other, we're a small area, we're a small market, we know each other well. And so that collaboration was very strongly formed at that point. And then we moved on to start tackling COVID response in some detail. There wasn't anybody rushing into our gap. Mass participation is probably worth, in running terms, something around £300 million of economic impact. It's low on the radar for government, and last on the list of events that are going to come back. We didn't have a significant lobbying presence, and so we had to try and get access to the relevant government department in the UK, which is the Department for Culture, Media and Sport. So we reformed the group and collaborated on quite a quick turnaround paper to present to government, which set out the series of principles, which I'm sure we can all discuss later, but the series of principles that would allow a return to mass participation in the UK. That is sitting with government right now, and we're hopefully on a carousel to be considered in due course about how our events might come back. But we're a long way behind the curve of, say, Australia and New Zealand and Thailand. We're still, gatherings of more than 6 people are still banned in the UK. There's no immediate prospect of a return to action. We've just this week cancelled the Great North Run, which would have been held in September, and with 60,000 runners is the biggest event in the country. So, we are looking at a slightly longer game here, I think, to get back to significant size of action. Our government support position is such that we have a scheme which allows government support for furloughed workers, i.e. workers who aren't coming to work are being supported by the government. This runs out in October, and it's essential that when we get to October, we have a pathway back to knowing how we're going to be able to trade again. But, I think it's unlikely that we'll stage any significant mass participation events in the UK in 2020. There are still some opportunities for them right at the end of the year, but I'm pessimistic. And our priority now is working on that pathway back. And that pathway is about 2 serious things: is pandemic conditions and the event operation conditions. And we need to understand from our government what that pandemic conditions are, such that we can't control that, but we'll know when we are heading in that direction, and what conditions they want us to operate on, so that we can be ready at the earliest opportunity to get back into action. So trying to put a timescale on that with our government, if anyone's been following our government response to the COVID-19 outbreak in the UK, it's haphazard, I think, is probably a fair way to put it. You know, we're a long way behind on things like test and track and trace. But we need to understand how that pathway back to action is going to be to allow us to get back into that, because there are 2 million runners a year taking part in events, including parkrun. You know, there's 300 million economic impact, 200 million pounds worth of charity donations that are all, and thousands of jobs that are all on the line here. So our group is now focused on that, understanding that pathway back in the UK. And it's going to take some time, I fear, but we have to be ready to go when it comes back, so that we don't take, to Kyle's point, the 6 to 12 months lead time, that we can be quick to spring back into action when we know we've got the green light to do so.
Thanks, Paul, and interested in that. So from a lobby perspective, you know, obviously in Thailand, we've got government at the table already. Kyle and the group in the US have employed lobbyists. In Australia, they have a former premier on their panel. Have you worked with lobbyists, or it's fundamentally the industry going directly to the appropriate ministry?
We've got reasonably good connections with the Department for Culture, Media and Sport, regardless, through ourselves, through London Marathon, other operators are well connected there. So we were able to reach the Director of COVID Response for Sport in the UK reasonably easily. But we've got to convince him, he's got to convince the Department of Health, they have to convince the Cabinet, and there's a long way to go up there. You know, sport returned recently behind closed doors. It was the first day of the Premier League yesterday, which was a strange experience to watch. And the next stage of that is reintroducing audiences in there, which starts to create the mass gathering conditions. And we hope that we can piggyback along behind that. So we're keeping close to the relevant working groups who are handling return to sport, return to audiences at sport. And we hope to be able to sort of dash in the door behind them. Understanding those conditions that we need to be able to meet to re-energize. So we haven't employed direct lobbyists. We've relied on our connections within the industry, which are so far getting us into the right places.
Great, thank you. Shall we try, and we've got Mr. Tao on the line, and we've got his interpreter, Ms. Zhu. Can you both hear us? Would you like to give us a little bit of a summary of the collaboration and what's happening in China at the moment, please? Ms. Zhu, you're muted at the moment. Let me just do my best to unmute you. Can you unmute yourself there? For some reason, it won't allow me to unmute you. Tell you what, let me keep working on trying to do that. Why don't we go up to you, Kirsten, the early riser in the group, and give us a sense of, yours is a very new alliance, only announced last week, as if I'm correct, but just give us a sense of, you know, what's been happening in Canada, what the objectives are. And Ms. Zhu, apologies, I'll keep trying to unmute you. Can you try and unmute yourself as well? Over to you, Kirsten.
Yeah, so we came together informally about 5 or 6 weeks ago, and we have the advantage of most of us who have formed this alliance are members of Running USA. So we've been fortunate to follow the blueprint of what Kyle and his team have been able to do because of the generosity of Running USA. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel. And, you know, the industry in Canada is very collaborative on an informal basis, but for better or for worse, we seem to outsource to the US when it comes to training and best practices. And most of us head down to the US where there's just a very established level of collaboration out of Chicago and of course through the Running USA folks. So those connections really were the basis of the beginnings of the conversation. And to be perfectly honest, like as a race director myself, I was in the throes of dealing with the spring race and we kept having these little sidebar conversations. And it finally became very apparent that if it's not going to be me, who is it going to be? And so we just started to, and I don't just mean me, I mean, I think all of us having these conversations. So these people who are, represent vendors and triathletes, trail running, not-for-profit. We were having these conversations, and we started to bring in a few new people, trying to fill out, representation right across Canada, and multidiscipline, for-profit, not-for-profit. I would say we've been together for about 6 weeks. It feels longer considering how many hours we're spending together on Zoom every week. But really, we didn't know each other before this, a lot of us. So in that short time, I would say we've been able to accomplish a lot. We've launched a bilingual website, endurancesportsalliance.ca. We've organized our data. To Chris's point, I think that's an advantage our industry has at this crazy level. We just have an incredible data. And then our job now is to turn that into the incredible story it is, and be able to share that with government in a way that's easy to understand. So that's kind of where we're at in the process. There's 11 of us, and we're formalizing our structure right now. We've been able to go out to the community. It's a very different story than in the US, where there's, I think something like 500,000 people who make their living off of endurance sports. Here in Canada, it is such a small but mighty group. I think there's about 3,000 full-time race directors. Right now, we have members that represent about 90% of the participants in the country outside of Quebec. We just are starting to work on our Quebec strategy now that we have a French representative. And we're really at the point where we've now RFP'd and have interviewed and reviewed proposals from 3 lobby groups. So consulting firms who are going to help us in Canada. It's called Government Relations. We just understood very quickly that, as busy as we are and as much as we're willing to dedicate to this, to get your foot in the door on Parliament Hill in Canada, to a very, a government who is handing out money here in this country, and one who understands the importance of sport by way of community mental health. Our Prime Minister is a massive runner. So we feel we have a really compelling story, and we wanted to make sure that we brought in experts to help us tell it in a way that's meaningful, direct, and gets above the noise. And so many people and so many industries are asking for money right now. So we're edging towards 100 members, but like I said, that actually represents the majority of the participant base right here in Canada. And similar to what Chris was saying about Australia, I mean, we have a very similar country as far as like the economics in our sport. We do $1 billion in economic impact, and over 250 million in charity fundraising dollars. So we're just now, trying to sell that story and piece together the data and get our members on board and helping us share that. We're just at the point of going to government, and we've identified some key politicians who we're going to, specifically, tackle to try and get them on side and lobbying on our behalf on both sides of the aisle. So that's sort of where we're at, Chris.
Wonderful. Sorry, I got the facts wrong there. It's been much longer in the making. And you mentioned race directors. The Australian one, obviously, very broad in terms of the whole ecosystem. You're focused more on race directors at this stage and more running focused, or across all of the verticals as well?
So all disciplines. We've really outreached to all disciplines: triathlon, cycling, grand fondos, and obstacle course racing, experiential runs. And we do have representation on our ad hoc committee, this interim board we're putting together from all of those disciplines. But for now, it has been focused on race directors, and I guess that's sort of the next decision, because we have kind of the next layer of vendors and supporting industries around us that we've now been speaking with and understanding how that will play into our ask of government. And right now we do have vendors, both large registration companies who are being just incredible advocates on our behalf and working so well collaboratively. It's actually amazing to see. Competitors by all intents and purposes, but sitting on this committee together and working really well together. And then also small business vendors, announcers, etc., who are helping out with us. So I think that it will probably cross into that direction.
Wonderful, thank you. Let's try now. Hopefully we can get Ms. Zhao and Mr. Tao on the line. Ms. Zhao, are you going to speak on behalf of Mr. Tao now?
Thank you, Chris. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, now I think everything's okay. Mr. Tao is ready. 涛到。
Mr. Tao, can you please share with us the collaboration that is happening, the likely sense of events coming back in China? Is there any timeline on that? What kind of situation is happening in the industry?
涛导，能听到吗？啊，哦，嗯，
You're breaking up a lot, Ms. Zhao. Sorry. Can keep speaking? Let's see if it comes through.
yes, I think, okay, I can say something about that. We have discussed it today, and you know, the Chinese government issued a document on May 29, and which stimulates that fitness places and sports fields can be opened in an orderly manner by appointment and flow restriction. Now, the Chinese, the epidemic in China is basically controlled, but not totally. So the competitions and marathon cannot be held now at this moment. But the government just want to have some such smaller games online, and the race organizers in China just organize such races, such like Lanzhou Marathon and Chengdu Marathon. I think they did successfully, just online. And there are also some smaller activities like 5 to 6 kilometers mini health runs. Just I think 100 to 300 people, not very much. But Chinese government, I think they have much more confidence about that, because they have seen that there are they have a lot to do in this in the sports area, especially in marathon. Many cities have a lot of interest in holding marathon games to for promotion.
So you seem to be saying that there's already some small events that are happening, 100 to 300 people are taking place, and the government is starting to allow approvals for those to happen with a view to moving forward to the longer distance ones. Is there any time frame on that over the next month, 2 months, 3 months before some of the bigger events start to return?
Now they have no such as for what the date is unknown, but now it's in summer, and some smaller city where is no much more epidemic, it's much safer. So they gradually have some just like the neighborhood run or just a happy run like that, because everybody cannot just stay in at home. So the competition, I think during these 5 years, Chinese marathon has increased very much. So it's a popular event now. And And then I have some data that like only all events, including the CAA, the Chinese Athletic Association certified and non-certified events totally, including a 10K marathon and healthy race, that increased from 1,581 races in 2018, and in 2019, 1,828. So it increased rapidly. And the number of the participants, I think now is even 7 million last year. So this industry, I think, has a bright future. So now just everybody is waiting for that, for the reopen.
for the return to come back. Thank you, Ms. Zhao. Let's come back to you with some more questions for Mr. Tao shortly. I'd like to maybe just go back to Nichapa, and you spoke about some of the hygiene things that you'd put in place without drilling down to huge detail, but obviously to get, I'm sure many people are interested. I'm sure everyone on this call is envious of Thailand about to open up and events happening, and I'm sure they'd like to get some kind of sense of, what were those key things with events opening that the government insisted would need to be there as safe guidelines for events to take place, please.
Right. Thank you, Chris. I think what has been outlined in the MICE hygiene discipline, it outlines the pre-event measures, the ongoing, the inaction, the during events, and also post-event. It also covers the pre-vaccine scenario and post-vaccine scenario. So, for example, the plan covers the new normal SOP on communications, on data collection, the touchless experience, the registration, the check-in, trace and tracking system, the temperature screening point, the crowd control, especially the crowd control. Right now, even though the government has not limited the number of overall participants, but again, they use the measure of 4 square meters per person as the benchmark. So basically, any organizers who would like to organize any event, they have to follow the 4 square meter per person guidelines. We also talk about or put in place the sustainability or the sustainable catering. For example, individual set or lunch box, the floor planning, where it has to outline the spreading of participants, the sanitation, the required sanitation measures, the hydration stations, how we can manage that, or even the rest village and more. So basically, we have series of set requirements, and these would we plan to make it as comprehensive as possible, and then the government would pick and choose the ones that are more relevant to them, so that we have at least a minimum standards for all operators to follow through. And whether or not they want to add on more measures into the standard set, it's up to them. But again, this hygiene discipline or measures, it has been launched or we have worked together with the Ministry of Sport and Tourism. We also work together with Ministry of Culture, because these two are the major 2 key government players in terms when it comes to sport events and also the art and culture area where Thailand has been focusing on. I can share with you the data if you like later on.
That would be wonderful if we could potentially share that. That would be great. And I'm aware that a couple of the groups are running events in one of your stadium, which are daily events with waves of 300 runners coming through. And I think, for the industry globally, I think this is one of the big things that's going to help us is as many case studies as possible where we can take to governments around the world. And that's a program that I understand is happening over a period of a month with, I think it's 1,000 runners per day, tracking them, following, seeing if there's any spikes. So that might be useful if there's any information on that that can be shared, that we can share with the group. And I guess whilst we're talking about case studies, I might go back to Kyle, because Spartan had their event this weekend in Florida, I believe, 1,400 participants. Any kind of feedback from that in terms of, relevant information? I know I was looking at it online, and I'm sure there's a bunch of people that have been following it, but any insights that you might share to give around that, please, Kyle?
Yeah, the Spartan team did an excellent job with the precautions and measures that they put in place for the event, and certainly a robust overlay of sanitization and cleaning and distancing measures to put in. So, the event that they hosted in Jacksonville was a great proof of concept to show that there is a road and a path to being able to get back to it. But realistically, and the Spartan team has acknowledged this in some of the interviews that they've done, a great piece in Runner's World that came out yesterday. The hosting a 1,400 person event with the type of measures and mitigations that they had in place is not a sustainable business model for our industry, right? Certainly not one where you're going to be able to break even or make a profit, and not one where you're going to be able to generate the type of audience that you need to do to perpetuate what we're trying to accomplish as a sport and as an industry here. So, some great learnings coming out of it, I think, particularly on how customers and runners are going to behave as well. And certainly, I think all of us that deliver running events know that as soon as you aren't guiding the runners to do what you want them to do, that they will immediately just kind of fill in the void of the space. And certainly, as much as we can encourage and require social distancing aspects, as soon as we release the regulations on lines and queues and start corrals, the runners are going to go where the runners are going to go, and it becomes very challenging to police effectively. But I think that the Spartan team did an excellent job. There's a couple of interviews and podcasts with them going around where they talk about the measures they put into place in more depth and detail. But I think we've still got a long road back to getting back to sustainable, scaled events here in the States. Certainly not the least of which is kind of complicated by a state by state, widely differing approach to what's allowed and what's not allowed. Florida was permissible and was quite accommodating and helping to facilitate a lot of the things that Spartan was able to do last weekend and down in Jacksonville. Now, we've got other states which have very vague bans on mass gatherings with no real end date in sight. So, for those of us who are trying to plan well into the future, it's even challenging to know whether December, January, February looks promising, and what that dialogue needs to be with a government entity to ensure that we can start to plan, with a reasonable confidence that it will happen.
Yeah, so that whole sustainability, and then you've got this interesting, the big players like Spartan and Ironman with decent budgets doing amazing stuff. I mean, the Ironman video that's going around, which I'm sure people have seen in terms of kind of their new normal, is great. And then obviously at the opposite end, you've got the small players that potentially play a role as well. So the smaller operators putting on safe events, because all it takes for us is one bad event, whether it's a 300 people event or a 200 people event that's on the front page of a newspaper, and we're all in trouble again. And with that, maybe be interested just to talk about the narrative a little bit. Chris, you've really gone on, announcing to the media, having media conferences, and you've picked up quite a lot of media in Australia. What is the kind of response to that been? What's the kind of narrative that the media has been picking up, and any guidelines for people in countries in terms of, changing the narrative maybe? It's on one level, it's about this massive economic impact on our industry, and the industry is losing. The area that I think we as an industry often don't get as right as we can is the health and social impact that we have on communities. We often focus on economic impact and not so much health and social. And I'm not for one moment saying that justifies us having unsafe events, but is there a case for saying, and I'd like to throw to a couple of the other panelists, is what kind of narrative are you doing, or are you doing anything to try and change that narrative away from the economic factors to the benefit factors from a health and social perspective?
Yeah, I think, Chris, there's probably two things that we've done. Firstly, I would say unashamedly, we can't shy away from the economics of it because of the situation. So that's the harsh reality that we're all, that we're all in business, and a lot of people are not coming back from this. But what we've done is two things. One is that one of our executive members, Craig Sheridan, is probably the leading risk consultant in the country, and Craig's done a huge amount of work on developing a risk protocol mitigation strategy, which is actually on our website. So it's open, it's there for anybody to look at, which is ampsi.com.au, and we're using that as a guide to demonstrate to government that we're serious about leading the industry. And what that is we've had a lot of positive feedback from our members about being able to use that strategy to then go into their specific areas. So they're using it to develop their own COVID plans, but it's probably breaking the back of 75 or 80% of what they need to do, and it's covering off all of the key checkpoints, which is something that a lot of, especially the smaller events that don't have the resources, they need that sort of help. So that's been a big thing. The second part of the narrative is very much about health. Mental health is a massive issue with COVID, as we know. We've been focusing heavily on that. And what we've also been focusing on is that, we're about getting people active. We've been about getting people off the couch. We've been about a healthy lifestyle and active society that then help the economy in areas such as health insurance and all these other areas that come into it. So we've been building that into the narrative as far as making sure that people understand the importance of our industry. That one of the key words that we focus on is participants. So we're actually dealing with participants. The other sports are dealing with spectators and people sitting on a couch watching on television. We're not doing that. We've actually got people out who are out there having a go and out there participating. And that's a big part of the message that we're striving hard to get through. Look, we've got a long way to go. I mean, New Zealand's a great story. We're on our way. We've still got a long way to go. We're certainly not there yet. A lot of events have not been scheduled in this country. We're hopeful, for example, of doing one event this year. We need the time. We need months to prepare. We need months to sell tickets. We need months to get permits. And we've got a lot of people that are a lot of government partners are quite gun shy about what we're doing. And so going back to what I said at the start, using that risk mitigation protocol from the industry body to be able to say, we're actually the experts here. We know what we're doing. We're committing to health and safety. And so therefore, here's the way in which we go about it. I'd encourage everybody to sort of take that lead, and especially in terms of these groups that are coming together.
Thanks, Chris. That's great. Kirsten's just put a question in the chat, and I'd encourage everyone, if anyone who's there would like some questions answered. We're starting to move. We're on the hour now. We got some great, I guess, initial discussions, which maybe took a little bit longer than I expected from people, but some great insights. So we'll continue for another 15 minutes with the tolerance of everyone. I think all the panelists can stay for that period of time, but if you need to drop off, please feel free to, and people that are attending. But Kirsten, I'm curious to know how different alliances landed on their collective ask and how they will distribute to members. Who'd like to take that? Maybe do you want to head over to you there, Paul, in London?
Yeah, sure. I think the ask is how do we get to it? I think to Kyle's point earlier, this is relevant about how the resources and the sustainability of an event work. We know that there are operators who have budgets of the London Marathon at one end, and right at the other end have tiny budgets and very little resource to allocate both people and cash against events. And so I think the important thing about the advice that we build together and put out from an alliance is it has to be at the principle level. It has to be general. It cannot say you must put in X amount of barriers, or you must put in specific numbers of hand gel sanitizers, because it's going to be different for every single type of event. And therefore, that the ask that we're saying is to consider, for the government to consider those principles. So our paper was a quite a high level set of principles that can be followed by any event, whether they are at the 40,000 people mark or the 400 person mark. They're just different solutions to the problem at different scales. So our ask is really, to hear the case for, we can socially distance an event, we can put in hygiene procedures. It's not to say a specific solution for every case, because every case will be different. So what we want to do is have the government agree to us, to agree to our set of principles, and then it would be up to each individual member of our team or our group to apply those principles to their event to solve that problem in the way that works for them. So I think we need to, it's important to work at principle level in a group like this, because every event is by nature very, very different. Whether you're dealing with car parks or public transport, for example, or whether you're dealing with hundreds of people in a short space of time or thousands of people over a longer day, you must have the principles in place. So I think the ask to government is to say, is to have them agree to those core principles rather than any specific on any given problem.
Thanks for that.
If I can jump in here for a second, I think Kristen, maybe your question was about the government funding side and what does the economic relief piece look like as well. One of the things that we kind of crossed on the early side of this was recognizing that it was highly unlikely that the government was going to come to the Endurance Sports Coalition and say, here's a pool of money for your organizers to help them make it through this. In the U.S. at least, we're seeing kind of broad sweeping government relief programs. We have a paycheck protection program, which is kind of a U.S. version of similar to the furlough scheme that Paul mentioned earlier. There's Main Street lending facilities where companies can get access to credit. What our goal has been is to ensure that policymakers understand the unique nuances of our industry as they're crafting some of these, so that our members will have access to existing government or new government programs that will be beneficial to them at whatever scale of a business they are. So if they're the single member operator or they're the 500 person entity, that they'll be able to access something that scales comparable to what they are. And that's been an interesting conversation as we've been talking to elected officials. Most of them think about this in businesses that they see every day. They think about it in retail, in restaurants, and manufacturing, and other places where the switch is much easier to flip back on, in terms of what it takes to get them either back to work or not back to work. Because we've been, and we've aligned ourselves with a number of others, kind of in the live event space, the Broadway League that represents theaters, the International Association of Theatrical Workers, a number of groups that do touring concerts and events like Live Nation and AEG, because the challenges that we're experiencing are quite similar to what they are as well. You can't turn major concert tours back on overnight. You can't flip theatrical productions back on with a week's notice. And together we've started to get some traction in helping them to understand that there are going to be a subset of businesses in the U.S. economy that are not going to bounce back immediately once states reopen and once economies reopen, that we're going to need sustainable long-term support to make sure we can retain our employees and be here to accommodate what I think we're seeing around the world, is that more people are exercising and running and riding their bikes now than they ever have before. And coming out of COVID, when they feel safe to come back to events again, we're well positioned as an industry to train and accommodate and inspire an entire new boom and a new generation of kind of mass participation participants. But we have to make sure we're around to do it.
Yeah, that's a great point. So that picks up that narrative of what we can do, but there's no point in us being able to do that if there's no one to do it, is there? Yeah, great point. Maybe just go back to you, Ms. Zhao and Mr. Tao. In terms of we've spoken about guidelines. What's happening in China in terms of guidelines for the industry? Is that driven by CAA? Is it driven by government in terms of informing event organizers what some of the new normal might be post-COVID to give them some guidelines to work to?
Hi. The Chinese government, I think they make a survey of the situation, and they understand the difficulties, and for the race, they just grasp and release a trend of the events. And now they have done something like strengthening communication with organized community, and for Hubei province, I think you know Hubei province. Wuhan, yeah.
Yeah.
There is Wuhan city is in Hubei province, yeah. And they have the policy that for that area, cancel the organization of the competition, for the measurement of the courses, and for provide technical guidance. I mean, this has some expense for the state. The government just cancel this part of expenses. And you know, in China we also have the label just like the IAF, the World Athletics did before. The label just gold and silver, bronze, like that. That is just the Chinese one.
So there's two levels of ranking with your World Athletics and CAA putting those guidelines in place.
Go up, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Ms. Zhao.
That is just you want to encourage the races to get better and better, to make great progress like that, to improve them, and this time for all the label ones this year, just to keep it to next year. And the government now do something just like make some videos on the online to help the runners to follow like that.
Understand. Thank you. Thank you. I got a couple more questions here. Please feel free to add. So Paolo is saying, what if this happens again? We're all talking about going back to normal. I believe we need to reinvent ourselves and create alternatives to the normal. Who would like to pick up on that one? Kyle, have a chat about that?
Yeah, happy to. I mean, I think the organizations that we've seen during COVID be able to sustain and survive and be able to sustain some revenue streams are those that had a more well-rounded approach to engaging with their participant base in the first place. And while many people and players in the industry have pivoted to offering virtual events, I don't think I'm saying anything controversial by saying that a lot of the virtual event offerings have been relatively lackluster. It's been a run around your neighborhood and we'll mail you your t-shirt and your medal, and not necessarily a sustainable strategy to engage people in something that they find to be valuable or inspiring, or something that's going to commit them to wanting to participate in a virtual manner as we go. But for organizers and operators who've relied on one or two or a few single mass gathering events, there's a big challenge to think about how do we diversify our offerings so that one, from an economic standpoint, so much of our revenue is not dependent on one single day out of the year, and two, how are we able to extend that conversation with our athletes and our participants in a way where they're coming to us as a resource for training, for nutrition, for other parts of the journey that even if we can't host that event, we're still a relevant part of their fitness journey. We're still a relevant part of their training, their daily exercise, the kind of the community that they associate with and identify with. And I think, as we come out the back end of this, and come in, a lot of members, and a lot of this industry around the world have shifted and pivoted there, right? But they've done it in a place where there's an immense amount of pressure. There's a small amount of resources. Everybody's experiencing cash constraints. So we've seen some pretty inspiring and incredible things come out of this with relatively little time and little resource to put into it. But I think what we will continue to see is the shift towards mass participation events, becoming more focused on providing the full suite of lifestyle interactions with their participant bases, and those that aren't able to do that, maybe the ones that that don't survive this and don't come out the backside of it. And it's scary to think about and sad to say, but this industry has been on a roller coaster of growth in a lot of places for some time, and it's going to take an event like COVID to potentially reorganize and reshuffle how the dominoes sit in our space globally.
It's interesting. I was talking to you, Kirsten, last week on the aid station. One of the things you suggested is that maybe it will also go back to the pure, when I started in the industry 35 years ago, it was mostly running clubs putting on kind of no frills events. So maybe there's going to be that kind of different ends of the scale where you'll have the people that Kyle are talking about, the organizations that survive, that put on that year-round engagement, and then you'll have an element of those where the running clubs will maybe become more important, again, volunteer-based. But I guess they're still going to have those same issues of the operational normals that are going to be required in terms of applying. And on that one, I'd like to go back to you, Nichapa, and just get a sense on those guidelines that were put in place when you shared some of them, the 4 meter rule and so on. Yeah, 2 meter rule, sorry. What's the kind of reaction been to the industry? Because my sense would be that, on one level, that's exciting that you can come back, but on another level, those sound quite onerous in terms of, to the point that Kyle and a number of people have made. We can't get away from the commercials of this event. Chris made it, Kyle made it in terms of the trial that happened with Spartan. Has there been any reaction from the industry to say we can't really operate under these terms, or at least we're going to try with some of these trial events like what's happening in the stadium there? What's been the response?
I think there are a few, there are a combination of the reactions there, but all came into consensus that what the discipline has been portrayed or outlined is basically to the benefit of a greater good in terms of public at large safety. So everybody would love to have the opportunity to run the events. That's the first thing that they want to have. And with this certain set of rule would give them the opportunity to do so. However, this rule would basically shift, I believe, because this is a preliminary or a basic standards for the government to sort of monitor and for the operators to sort of follow, to set a new norm. And once everything is in place and we have a better feeling, better understanding, and better management on how to run a safe event, we can always go back to the government to relax the rules a little bit. But again, the first stage is to make sure that everybody is on the same page as a standard. And again, we believe that we all agree that we cannot entertain convenience at the expense of, people's lives. So basically, this is a good first step to go. Yeah.
Thank you. And I guess that's it, isn't it? We've got to take the baby steps, and the challenge is that, we all recognize that those are uncommercial at the moment, but, hopefully there's going to be some people in the industry that can help us to take those, and everyone globally benefits. Folks,
I would like to add as well, in terms of the support, because of the current situation, of course, the government will have to play a big role in terms of providing the support, whether it is financial or non-financial. Take TCEB, for example, and I'm sorry, I didn't mean to brag, but this is the campaign that we already have. We always provide a good, substantial financial support to the organizers, especially with the COVID thing, the situation, because we need to make sure that events will have to be ongoing, because once the event is on, then it really helps and kickstart the whole ecosystem. And that is more important in terms of get the ball rolling instead of, focusing on a specific point and let the event die. So we have the support in terms of how we can turn around and we relax all the criteria just to make sure that the organizers have an easiest way to get the funds. Yeah, we provide the online, the virtual support. Even though you want to turn your whole event into online, as long as you have the event, we provide the support. We also help consolidate the support from respective government bodies like Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Sports and Tourism, on how we can really relax the criteria so that we collectively would be working on the same team and as one Thai team to make sure that we can get the events rolling. So the government support is very important, and I agree to many of the points that many of the gentlemen has been saying. However, in terms of making sure that we come out fresh start, we, instead of looking at the commercial side of it, we have to also factor in not only the sustainability side of it, but also the legacy on how we can really make the event create a great impact in a more sustainable fashion to the community. And if we can prove that, of course, we have all the supporting figures and everything, but if we have a stronger and solid point to the government that, okay, this is a special event, and you can work with your CVB. I don't know whether your CVB would be the same as TCEB, but TCEB has always been a good voice, and we are very active in terms of playing a good part in lobbying the government that you have to provide more funding to mass participation, because this is big and it can really create a good impact in a more general terms, the economic impact, the social impact, and also if we can prove that it can really create the legacy that would be beneficial to all.
Thank you very much. I know we're out of time, but I just, the point you've made there for me is about data. And, we've got our colleagues in America and Canada that are very lucky to be rich in data. And I think mainly thanks to the amazing work that Running USA has done for so long. And then obviously the industry coming together. Chris, you gathered some data there. And I think maybe just some insights into how you were able to do that in fairly short time, because with the last poll I put out, we've got, I think, 8 or 9 people on the call saying that they're interested in forming an alliance. And clearly a key part of us being able to lobby government is to be able to take some of this data. How were you able, as an organization, in such a short period of time to gather so much valuable data that you were able to share and put out in releases and take to government?
Yeah, it's quite simple, Chris. We made sure that we had the registration platforms as part of the group. So the registration platforms in the country have got access to the 8,500 events I touched on earlier, because that's the platform they're using to register. So that was a great opportunity for us to go to their clients, and so that's fundamentally how we did it. And that meant we were able to get great buy-in. We were able to go directly to decision makers and encourage them to buy in and share that data. And we also had one of the guys we secured the services of a data expert, and he led the charge in terms of the technical side of things. But from our point of view, everything that's been done in Australia has been pro bono. So there's been nobody paid any money, and nobody's put any money in. It's all been a complimentary contribution by everybody.
Fantastic, thank you, and great point there, Kirsten. It's about turning that data now into a story, and nobody better than you with your media background as well, understanding that. But certainly, and you say video obviously key as well. Folks, I think we're out of time. Just, a couple of things that do stand out there is, the importance of creating principles rather than rigid guidelines, which kind of paint us into a corner, working with broad principles. Clearly, it's going to vary from location to location. The key issue that Kyle made is really making policymakers, if you're looking at doing this in your different geographies, understanding the nuances of our industry, the complications, the fact that we're not a restaurant that can reopen in 7 days and clean up the furniture and order in food, that it takes months of lead time to be able to get the permits in place and so on. So that long lead time, obviously some fairly pessimistic outcomes, sadly, in terms of the number of events we have, but that are likely to happen. But we need to start somewhere and build. the objective here is hopefully to have provided some insights. We could talk for 3 hours. We've already run over. Hopefully, those of you that have been on the call have been able to get some insights. Very happy to connect with me, as I've said, Chris at chrisrobb.asia. If I can connect you with any of these, particularly those 8 or 9 people who said they're interested in forming alliances themselves, I'm sure there's some willingness here, because at the end of the day, wherever we start, in my mind, it doesn't matter who comes back first. The more that come back and the more we can learn and the more we can share, the better for the industry globally in our own markets. And obviously, we're an industry that relies on inbound tourism, people traveling and flying to participate in our events. And the more geographies we get this happening, the better. So thank you very much. A big thank you for all of you that have joined and going through our panelists. Nichapa, thank you for joining us from Bangkok. Kirsten, thank you so much for your very early start at 4 a.m. Mr. Tao Shaoming, we didn't hear you, but Ms. Zhou spoke on your behalf. Thank you very much, Ms. Zhao. Paul Foster from London, Chris Heverin from Melbourne. Time to go and have a nap now, mate. Thank you so much. It's getting on there. And Kyle, another early start. Thank you so much for all of your insights. Look forward to seeing you next week for those of you that are interested, with Mike Nishi and Hugh Singh. Mike from Chicago Marathon, an absolute legend of our industry, I believe one of the most sharing people in our industry, always very, very open to sharing what he has for the benefit of the industry. And Hugh Singh, medical director of the Singapore Marathon. Sleep well, have a great day, whatever end of the day you are. Thank you so much to our panelists and for those of you that have joined us. Thanks so much.
Thanks, guys.
Bye. สวัสดีค่ะ
สวัสดีครับ Thank you for staying with us, Ms. Xiao and Mr. Tao. I know it's been tough for you with with the connectivity. I really appreciate you staying to try and speak to us. Mr. Tao, I'm sorry that we couldn't hear you, but really appreciate you making the time and getting the message across. Thank you so much. 谢谢.
Thank you.
谢谢.
Thank you. Thanks again.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.